Israel says it's ramping up its strikes on Gaza as the world watches and waits for the moment tanks massed on the border roll into the Gaza Strip. And this week, some moments of relief in the darkness of war. Joy for one family as US hostages are released by Hamas after being abducted in that brutal assault on Israel. And some relief as aid trucks cross from Egypt into Gaza for the first time since the war erupted. It follows a week of diplomacy as leaders from around the world race to stop this conflict spreading.
We cannot give up on peace. We cannot give up on a two-state solution.
An explosion at a hospital in Gaza, still heavily contested, threw those efforts off course. Rishi Sunak flew to the Middle East to give support to Israel.
We will stand with you in solidarity, we will stand with your people, and we also want you to win.
Thank you.
While back at home, the political sands look to be shifting.
Labour Party, 11,719 votes.
Two historic by-election victories put Sir Keir Starmer potentially on the path to taking Rishi Sunak's place on the global stage after the next general election.
People are fed up to the back teeth with 13 years of decline under this government.
As this horrific conflict continues to cause suffering for so many, what will it take to solve it? And how can our politicians play their part? With us in a moment to talk about what might come next is Immigration Minister Robert Jenrick. After Labour's big by-election wins, Lisa Nandy could soon be representing you all over the world. The Shadow International Development Minister is with us from Salford. As the UN calls conditions inside Gaza catastrophic, we'll speak to Dr. Hanan Ashrawi, a woman who has spent decades at the heart of Palestinian politics. And we'll talk to Israel's former Prime Minister, Naftali Bennett. Good morning. You might have seen, by the way, that we were going to speak to Israeli President Isaac Herzog this morning. He has had to postpone, but hopefully he will be with us on a future programme. In the meantime, welcome to our panel this morning. Jasmine El-Gamal, a Middle East expert who advised the Obama administration. Also, best-selling historian and TV presenter Simon Sebag Montefiore and Lucy Fisher, the Financial Times Whitehall editor and host of its Political Fix podcast. Let's have a look at some of the front pages of the newspapers this morning. A lot of them reflect on the death of football legend Sir Bobby Charlton, who died yesterday at the age of 86. Others focus too on the conflict between Israel and Hamas. The Mail on Sunday says, Israel, we will strike the head of the snake, Iran. The Observer says US holding Israel back from strike against Hezbollah. That's in Lebanon. And the Sunday Times goes with Hamas chief lives in a council house he bought in Barnet. And finally, the Sunday Telegraph says US tells Sunak to ban the Iranian terror guard. Well, let's talk to our panel this morning. Good morning. Welcome to the programme, all of you. Jasmine, how do you assess where we are with this conflict today?
Well, 2 weeks into the conflict, we're at a really critical juncture, both when it comes to the humanitarian situation and the military situation. So obviously, the humanitarian crisis is growing worse by the second. You have over 4,000 Palestinians killed so far. Against that backdrop, the Israeli military is preparing for a ground invasion. Over 300,000 troops have been mobilized, and the Israelis say they plan on going in and dismantling and destroying Hamas. At the same time, in the West Bank, so this is just in Gaza, settler violence against Palestinian residents has been increasing as the Interior Minister of Israel has armed those settlers with assault weapons, calling them a civil defense force of sorts. And then finally, in terms of the region, the U.S. is sending additional assets to the region, preparing for what could be an all-out regional war if Iran or Hezbollah get involved. And that, unfortunately, today is not something that we can take completely off the table.
So how likely do you think that is to happen?
It depends on so many factors, but I think it mostly depends right now on the deterrence capability of the U.S. to Iran and to Hezbollah. They have these military assets there. It's giving a huge sign, and there's also been conversations behind the scenes to say, listen, you do not want to be a part of this. You do not want to get involved with this.
Simon, you're an expert on the history of the region. What can history tell us about where this might go next?
Well, I mean, first of all, one's got to say, dark times, you know, the Hamas kill raid on Israel, killing civilians, was the greatest atrocity against Jewish people since the Holocaust, and really belongs in Jewish history with the pogroms in Russia in the 1640s, in the early 20th century, and the Crusades. You know, the slitting of throats, the raping of women, the taking of hostages, all unprecedented, really. In terms of the state of Israel, it's the greatest crisis that the state of Israel has faced since independence in 1948. Israel has to scatter Hamas and launch an incursion into the Gaza, but it has a huge responsibility to do so surgically and to respect Palestinian civilians, and that every Palestinian civilian matters as much as an Israeli civilian, and Hamas is not the Palestinians. So that is an essential point. In the wider conundrum for Israel is how to do this, respecting civilians, and yet at the same time deterring Hezbollah in the north, as Jasmine says. In the bigger picture, they must be able in the future to talk to their Arab friends in the moderate world, in the Arab world. That is the future of the Middle East. They have to deter Iran, and they have to open a dialogue with the Palestinian Authority in the near future, and they mustn't do anything that would make that impossible. That's essential.
Lucy, can I ask you about domestic news, if I may? Obviously, the by-elections this week, a double triumph for Labour. Where does that leave Sir Keir Starmer? Where does that leave Rishi Sunak?
Well, look, I think we've seen Labour, as much as they try and ward against complacency and try to temper public expectations, really engaging in celebration this weekend after those historic results in Mid-Beds, the overturning the largest numerical majority ever in Tamworth, the second biggest swing to Labour in a by-election on record. Starmer, I think, very much is hoping to build on this momentum, particularly after the other by-election success in Rutherglen and Hamilton West that suggests that Labour is resurgent in Scotland. I think now they will just be trying to carry on with this caution strategy, the Mingvald strategy of ensuring that they don't rock the boat or lose the poll lead that they have established. Things are very gloomy in Conservative circles. Rishi Sunak is under severe pressure following the defeats this week. He's looking at demands from particularly the right flank of his party to forge ahead with tax cuts, something he's not wanting to do because the public finances are so tight. There isn't the headroom to fund such tax cuts. Others on the right calling for ECHR membership to be back on the table again. So look, for fast forward to next month, we've got the King's speech, his party urging him to make bigger, bolder moves. We've got the autumn statement, the pressure for tax cuts will be on. And I think more broadly, there is a sense he needs to re-energise his administration, possibly with a wide-ranging reshuffle, because the reset he attempted at conference hasn't seemed to move the dial.
OK. Thank you for the moment. We'll be back with you very soon. Thank you. We'll obviously be asking Robert Jenrick about the pressure for tax cuts from some within his party a little later in the programme. But by any measure, the Labour Party has had a triumphant week. Even seasoned political journalists didn't think they would be able to take two ultra-safe Tory seats, Tamworth and Nadine Dorris's former constituency, Mid-Bedfordshire. But take them they did, making by-election history and overturning two big Tory majorities in the process. Of course, there is a way to go until the general election, but it does make it look a lot more likely that my next guest might soon be representing you on the world stage. Lisa Nandy is the Shadow Development Minister, and she joins us from Salford. Good morning to you, Lisa Nandy.
Good morning.
Now, the Prime Minister has written in one Sunday newspaper today that, quote, "We all need to see all water supplies to Gaza restored where physically possible." Does Labour agree with that?
Absolutely. There was a humanitarian crisis in Gaza long before the appalling events of October the 7th. And there's now a humanitarian emergency that is threatening to tip over into catastrophe. There's a real issue about the scale of the aid that has gone in. There was a brief window of light over the last 24 hours where we saw 20 trucks go across the Rafah crossing, but there's no corridor through Gaza at the moment so that can reach people in northern Gaza, and most importantly, there's no agreement on fuel. And there are serious practical challenges to overcome in order to resolve that, particularly because if there's no fuel, the water can't flow and the hospitals can't power up.
Right. So you want water supplies restored and Israel should let fuel in?
Well, there's a practical issue about fuel that is currently being dealt with. I spoke to the UN humanitarian coordinator about this in the last 48 hours. The problem with fuel is that Israel is clearly very anxious about the prospect of Hamas getting their hands on the fuel and using it to launch rockets, but the UN and Egypt and others are trying to broker a solution to that would ensure that fuel stays safely in the hands of the United Nations and aid agencies and is used for the purposes it's intended. But I can't stress the seriousness of this. There are currently incubators being turned off in hospitals for newborn babies because there isn't sufficient fuel to be able to keep the power on, and we've got to make sure that is resolved within hours, not days.
If Israeli troops do manage to eliminate Hamas, who should run Gaza after that?
Well, I think these are longer-term questions for the people in Gaza, the Palestinian people, for the international community to help broker, and of course for Israel as well.
But do you have a vision? Does the Labour Party have a vision?
Well,
do you want to be representing Britain after the next election? What is your vision?
Well, our vision remains two states living peacefully side by side. But at the moment, particularly for Palestinians, for a long time, that has seemed like a very distant prospect indeed. And when we've resolved the immediate crisis, when we've got hostages out and sufficient amounts of aid in, we need to look at the longer term picture. There was a peace summit in Cairo yesterday which laid bare the difficulties with doing that in the current environment. Minds are very much focused on the humanitarian emergency in Gaza and the plight of the hostages right now.
But again, in the short term then, do you think Israel should have a strategy about what happens to Gaza after a ground incursion?
Well, we don't know what's going to happen in relation to a ground incursion. There's been talk about it for days. What we do know is that within hours we've got to significantly scale up the amount of aid that is going into Gaza: food, medicine, water and fuel. And we've got to make sure that we elevate the efforts to release the hostages, many of whom are in a very critical situation at the moment without access to the medication that they need. Longer term, what we need is the same sort of sustained effort between Palestine and Israel that we've seen in the region in relation to the Abraham Accords. There is a strong view amongst the Palestinians that that same effort has not been made on the issue of a two-state solution, and we've got to show not just that we can keep the flame of hope alive through careful, sustained diplomacy, but show real progress, and that will be a priority for the next Labour government.
Can I ask you about what Keir Starmer said on the 11th of October? He was asked on LBC if an Israeli siege was appropriate, including cutting off power, cutting off water, and he replied, "I think Israel does have that right." Why did he say that?
He's clarified that this week, that he was answering the previous question and then went on to talk about the importance of international law. I was with Keir on the 7th of October when we held a vigil at Labour Party conference in support of Israeli civilians and what had happened with the horrendous Hamas attack. He made the point at that vigil that international law must be respected and upheld, and he's made it many, many times since.
I mean, the problem is it took him 9 days to issue the clarification you've just referenced. And in that time, a number of people in Britain's Muslim community have expressed anger at what he said and at the position of the Labour Party. Various Muslim councillors have resigned. The Labour Muslim Network has asked for an apology. Will they get one?
Well, look, we can't apologise for holding a position that we've never held. Keir has been clear and consistent on this, as has
he wasn't
David
clear
Lammy,
on that
and
day.
as have I.
He wasn't clear on that day with LBC, though, was he?
Well, that's why he clarified when he was asked about it, to make sure that people hear loud and clear from us.
And it took
that
9
international
days.
law must be upheld. Look, Keir and I met with aid agencies this week to talk about the unfolding crisis, the emergency on the ground. I can tell you that we are acutely aware of what is happening in Gaza at the moment and the urgent need to get help to people. We're acutely aware that for Palestinians in Gaza, this didn't start on the 7th of October, that they have been in crisis for over a decade and a half with very little prospect of peace.
OK. And do you understand why some Muslim Labour supporters have felt alienated by what he said?
I completely understand why people in the Muslim community are in extraordinary amounts of pain right now, and heard those words and felt very concerned. And I'm glad that we've clarified that. I'm glad that we've been consistent about that. Keir, David Lammy and myself, and continue to be consistent about that. And I'm glad to be able to make that point on your programme,
OK.
Victoria, because people are very frightened about what's happening to their relatives at the moment. They're very, very worried about what's happening on the streets of Britain as well, and for their own personal safety. And it was important for me to be able to go to Friday prayers and express my solidarity with the Muslim community, to hear that pain and to assure them that we are doing everything that we can, even from the position of opposition.
Right,
we
well,
have influence, and we're doing everything that we can to try and resolve this.
Let's see if you can be clear about Labour's position then. Do you think Israel breached international law by cutting off water and power supplies?
Look, I think this is an extraordinarily complex and fast-moving situation. There are 200 hostages.
And what's the answer to the question?
Well, look, Israel has the right to self-defence, and it has a duty to secure the release of its hostages.
Sure. But my question was,
ensure
my question was,
international law is upheld.
Right, and so my question is, do you think Israel has breached international humanitarian law by cutting off water and fuel supplies?
Well, in the last 24 hours, we've seen water, medicine and food enter Gaza. It is in very limited supply at the moment, but I am hopeful that we'll be able to amplify and scale up those efforts urgently. There is a very small window in which an Israeli government that is responding to fear and pain in Israel, and the Egyptian government as well, who have serious concerns about the opening of the Rafah crossing, may be persuaded, with the help of the United States and others, to not just allow aid into Gaza, but to allow safe passage through Gaza to reach people in the north. And that's what we've got to focus on.
I am going to ask the question again. Do you think Israel breached international law by cutting off power and water supplies?
Look, I'm not going to sit in your studio and grandstand and tell you that I'm going to make big pronouncements about what Israel is and isn't doing in what is a very complex, difficult situation where, as you know, a number of your panel have just recognised, Israel is still having rockets fired against its own people from a prescribed terrorist organisation, and where you've got 200 hostages sitting in basements in Gaza who haven't yet been released. What we've got to ensure is that international law is upheld. That's why the 20 trucks that went into Gaza were very important yesterday, but not sufficient. And that's why all of our efforts are focused on keeping that window open, keeping that crossing open, and scaling up those efforts urgently. There is a humanitarian catastrophe looming for people in Gaza, and that's where we've got to focus.
Thank you very much for talking to our audience this morning. Thank you.
Thank you.
Lisa Nandy from Labour. Well, as Israel vows to ramp up strikes on the Gaza Strip, they are warning Palestinians still in the north to flee south. Meanwhile, the United Nations has described conditions in Gaza as catastrophic. I've been talking to Dr. Hanan Ashrawi, a veteran Palestinian politician who spent decades campaigning for Palestinian liberation. I asked her for the latest on what's happening in the Gaza Strip.
There is really a genocide in the making. The people are not just besieged and bombed and homes demolished, and more than half of the people, 1.2 million, are now homeless, displaced and terrified. There's no water, there's no electricity, there's no food, there's no medicine, no medical supplies, and no fuel. So they're worried that the Hospitals will run out of fuel to run the generators. They have about 13,500 injured. And how can they treat them? How can they deal with them? Hospitals have been bombed, schools have been bombed, homes have been bombed and shelled, and universities have been bombed and shelled. It's incredible. This is total devastation. It's beyond catastrophe. I don't know what it is. There's a deliberate attempt at the total destruction of all requirements of a normal life.
The Israeli government would absolutely reject that. As you know, they are targeting Hamas and their military structures. They say they do not target civilians and that they have a right to defend themselves in the wake of the Hamas massacre on Israeli people.
If you call that a massacre, you should see all the massacres that happened to the Palestinians. If you use the logic of revenge, then certainly since the creation of the State of Israel, we have been subject as Palestinians to a series of massacres.
What have the actions of Hamas meant for the chances of any resolution to this long-running conflict?
Well, we've tried several times, the PLO, the national program, everybody tried to have a negotiated settlement, and it didn't work because Israel insisted on continuing with its occupation, continued with its land grab, its home demolitions, its assassinations and killing of people. And that's what really prevented any kind of peace agreement.
I wonder if perhaps if all the hostages, all the rest of the hostages held in Gaza were released immediately and unconditionally, that might help.
And look, we don't like to see any hostages, any civilian hostages taken. We as Palestinians have been held hostage since 1967. 80,000 Palestinians have been killed. 1 million have been imprisoned. We consider all our prisoners hostages.
I wonder if you do have to acknowledge the barbarity, the brutality of the attack on Israelis in southern Israel by Hamas before this can move forwards.
Oh, God. I mean, I can't believe I'm hearing the same thing over and over again. This is a preoccupation with the Western media because something happened to Israel for the first time in its history. Everybody's up in arms and its victims have to condemn themselves. Israel has been doing this to us for decades. Piecemeal, day in, day out, people killed, homes demolished. And we're telling you how many Palestinians have been killed by a brutal Israeli occupation. Total siege in Gaza, total destruction and land theft in the West Bank. Nobody brings Hamas spokespeople, Israeli spokespeople and say, do you condemn this? Isn't this brutal? Isn't this genocide? Isn't this? No. But the moment people under siege, look at Gaza. It's an area where people haven't had a day of normal life. And then when they lash out, when they break out, immediately all sorts of horrific labels are used.
Were the Israeli citizens legitimate targets?
The problem is using, as I said, this logic.
I just want to be clear. I just want to be clear. Are you saying that the Israeli citizens were legitimate targets?
No, I don't believe in civilians being legitimate targets at all. At all. In the same way as we are not legitimate targets of Israel. Our homes, our lands are not at its disposal. Our freedom, our rights have been denied. No, don't put words in my mouth.
Okay.
Never. Civilians are never legitimate targets. But what I'm talking about is the double standard.
Okay.
Israel is an occupying power. This has to be acknowledged. Israel has been torturing the Palestinians since 1947. It is time this stops without constantly looking for excuses and blaming the victim.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ashrawi. Thank you for being with us this morning. We appreciate your time. Well, listening to that was Immigration Minister Robert Jenrick. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
Your reaction, first of all.
Well, we abhor violence and the loss of innocent lives on both sides of this terrible conflict. We do believe it is absolutely essential that Israel has the ability to defend itself, to secure its people after the murderous, barbaric attack by Hamas. And ultimately, it's by degrading and eradicating Hamas, that both Israelis and Palestinians will have a path to peace.
Now, on Friday night, 2 US hostages were released, as you know. Rishi Sunak today, writing in a Sunday newspaper, says the first thing we must do is support the families of British victims and get the hostages back. How confident are you that you will be able to get British hostages out?
Well, the first thing to say is we should celebrate the release of 2 innocent civilians who are now out of the appalling situation that they're in. We are working intensively with all our partners across the region to secure the release of British nationals who are being held hostage by Hamas.
Are you confident that will happen?
Well, I can't comment on the specific cases. I hope you can understand that. It's just too serious a situation to do so. These things are best handled privately and quietly, but what the families of those people should know is that the Prime Minister and the Foreign Secretary are doing absolutely everything they can, and that's one of the reasons why they've been talking to our partners across the region, raising that at the highest level, including important interlocutors like Qatar, to try to secure their release.
There are also British nationals trapped in the Gaza Strip. Do you know how many? Are you going to be able to get them out? And what is it that's stopping people with British passports and other foreign passports being able to get out of the Gaza Strip?
Well, we have a list of British nationals who are in Gaza. Those are British passport holders and their dependents who have registered with the Foreign Office. We're keeping in close contact with them, and we want to secure their safe passage.
And do you know what's stopping them coming out? What's the hold-up?
Well, we have secured, along with other partners, the supply of humanitarian aid through the Rafah crossing, but not yet foreign nationals, including British nationals' ability to leave through the Rafah crossing. That's one of the things that the Prime Minister and the Foreign Secretary have raised with President Sisi in Egypt. We understand some of their legitimate concerns, the difficult situation that Egypt finds itself in, but we're working very hard to try and get those individuals out as quickly as we can. Of course, we're also playing our part in getting that crucial aid, food, water, medical supplies and other support into Gaza so that individuals there of all nationalities can get some relief from the crisis that they find themselves in. And it's critical that we do that, and also that we ensure...
And Rishi Sunak, again, writing in this newspaper, says we need to see all water supplies to Gaza restored where physically possible. Have the Israelis given you any guarantee that that is going to happen?
We have been raising with Israel and indeed with Egypt. Well, Israel doesn't want to see innocent Palestinians suffer. Their war is with Hamas, which is a murderous terrorist regime.
But turning off the water affects all Palestinian people, not just Hamas.
Well, as I say, the good news is that the first aid has now got through.
No,
and
I know that.
We've contributed to that by raising it at the very highest levels. We want to see much more than that, because that's just a welcome first step, and we're coordinating very closely with the United Nations. One issue is to ensure that Hamas don't divert any of the supplies that are provided, particularly energy supplies, for their own activities, and that what does go into Gaza exclusively goes to support the innocent civilian population.
Rishi Sunak has been visiting various countries last week. James Cleverly was at that peace summit in Cairo yesterday. The British government is putting itself at the heart of the diplomatic efforts. So it'd be good to know if you have got a clear vision for how this conflict could be resolved. President Biden saying last week, don't make the same mistakes America and its allies, the UK, did after 9/11. Does the UK government agree that Israel needs a clear plan for what happens the day after it gets rid of Hamas, assuming it does?
Well, this is one of the reasons why the Prime Minister has been engaging with all of our partners and allies throughout the region. And we do think that the UK has a role as a very close friend and supporter of Israel, but also a close partner of a number of other countries in the region. The first step is for Israel to be able to secure its borders and to degrade and eradicate Hamas.
And after that?
They need to do that, if I could just say, they need to do that in a surgical way that respects the civilian population in Gaza. After that, of course, we want to work towards a world in which there are two states, Israel and Palestine, free of the tyranny of Hamas, in which the Israeli and Palestinian people can live side by side. That is a long way off today.
It is. So let me ask you about the middle bit.
The actions of Hamas.
Let's imagine Hamas is destroyed. Who replaces Hamas to govern Gaza?
Well, I'm not going to speculate on the options, but those are conversations that are being discussed by international leaders. But
Does the British government have a view, a strategy, a vision?
Well, we are working with our partners, but I'd say that there is a crucial first step here, which is that we've got to get Hamas degraded, eradicated out of Gaza, because it's impossible to see a way to peace when you have a regime running Gaza which is dedicated to the destruction of Israel and to the murder of Jewish people.
Right.
So that is the essential
and that's what Joe Biden was talking about.
To moving forward.
About not doing this, making the same mistakes as the UK and the US and other allies did. Post-Saddam Hussein. There was no plan for post-Saddam Hussein, and that's what I'm asking you about post-Hamas. If Israeli troops manage to eliminate Hamas, the Israelis have said they won't be responsible for life in the Gaza Strip. The Palestinian Authority have indicated they won't go back into Gaza. There needs to be a plan, doesn't there?
There does, and that's why the UK is playing a leading role in this.
And have you got an idea of a plan?
But that's not something that we, or indeed Israel, have spoken publicly about. What we want to do is to listen to the views of Israel and to leaders within the Arab world. I think that's incredibly important and is something that perhaps didn't happen in the conflicts that you've spoken about in the recent past. We want to listen and use the unique role that the UK actually has, which is an interlocutor that is trusted both by partners like Egypt and a number of the Gulf states, but also, of course, crucially by Israel. But as I say, the first step, which has to happen, is that Israel have to be able to act to defend themselves and get rid of Hamas.
Yeah. Should Britain accept refugees from Israel and Gaza, like we did Ukrainians, if they want to come here?
Well, I think that for the reasons you've just described, that's a bit premature. The first step...
Why?
Because at the moment we're still working with Egypt and others to get British nationals out of Gaza, and we're trying to get aid into Gaza. So that's what we have to do.
And if we're in a position whereby Gazans or Israelis want to flee and want safe haven in the UK, would you set up a scheme similar to the one the UK did for Ukrainian people?
Well, I don't think that the first step that the UK should do when there is a conflict or a humanitarian disaster around the world is to reach for migration as the solution.
I wasn't suggesting it would be the first step.
The best thing that the UK can do in these situations is to use our diplomatic heft and to use our very generous and significant international development aid budget to support people in places like Gaza. And that is what the UK intends to do. We're coordinating closely with the UN and looking to see whether there are more things that we could do on the humanitarian front in the coming days. That's our priority at the moment.
Right. Let's talk about domestic news. Obviously, last week's by-elections, they've been described by Professor Sir John Curtis, the elections guru, as spectacular losses for your party. You've had 48 hours now to reflect on what happened. Does the buck stop with Rishi Sunak?
Well, we're all disappointed by those results. Of course we are.
And does the buck stop with him?
Well, Rishi Sunak is the Prime Minister, but we're all in government responsible for the Conservative Party and what we're doing to deliver for the British public. I think the Prime Minister is making good progress. We're working extremely hard. We have the right priorities which match those of the public. The key thing is that we actually deliver on those priorities.
Sure. Where do you see progress? Because we certainly didn't see it on Thursday night, did we?
Well, in terms of what we are delivering for the public, I see that inflation is starting to come down. I see that the economy is growing. In my own brief, I see that we're beginning to make progress on stopping the boats. Numbers are falling substantially.
It doesn't seem to be having any effect, though, if you look at what happened in Tamworth and Mid-Beds. I mean, in Tamworth, Labour overturned a majority of almost 19,000. In Mid-Beds, a majority of 25,000.
Well, with all due respect, I wouldn't read too much into by-elections. Governments tend to lose by-elections. I was elected in a by-election 9 years ago, and at that point, the Conservative Party hadn't won a by-election in government for 25 years.
They are massive majorities with double-digit swings. Are you in denial?
I think we all have to listen to what the voters are saying in those by-elections, but we also shouldn't read too much into them. My sense is that the public are undecided. They're certainly not sold on Keir Starmer. Conservative voters want a good reason to come out and vote for us.
Labour just won those 2 by-elections.
The key thing for us as a party right now is not to worry about party politics, but to deliver on the public's priorities. People are worried about the cost of living. They want us to bear down on inflation, which we're doing. They want us to have a strategy to grow the economy, and it is growing. And on areas of absolutely critical domestic concern like illegal migration, which I'm responsible for, they want us to get on and stop the boats. And I'm pleased to say, although there's clearly a long way to go in this regard, our plan is beginning to bear fruit.
Right.
The numbers crossing are falling, whilst they're rising by over 100%.
Sure. But you're nowhere near stopping them, which was the promise.
No, we want to stop them entirely. But if you'd said to me
and the
a year
NHS
ago,
waiting list continued going up,
could we be the only country in Europe where they're falling, I would have said that's difficult.
How worried are you about your own seat? Because you've only got a majority of 21,816.
Well, any member of Parliament would be foolish to be complacent. We all have to work hard and be good constituency MPs. That's what I try to do every day. But as the government's priority is looking at the public's challenges, like the economy, like immigration, like public services, and working day in, day out for the rest of this Parliament to deliver for the British public.
Did you just say a moment or 2 ago that you never said you stopped the boats entirely? Can I just check you said that?
No, what I said was that we are working to stop the boats completely. That is our objective. Okay. But I mean, this isn't a simple task, and anyone who would say that doesn't understand the issue. It's one of the most challenging issues facing any developed country in the world today.
And do you think,
but our plan is actually working.
And do you think Rishi Sunak's A-levels reform and smoking ban is going to get your base out in time for a general election?
Well, I think people care passionately about education and the prospects
I don't see people marching in the streets
children.
wanting reform of A-levels.
I think people in a constituency like mine do want to see good technical and vocational education that is of the same parity of esteem as academic qualifications like A-levels. And if we can bring them...
Is that coming up on the doorstep then? Is that why you introduced it?
It is actually. The Prime Minister...
Come on.
Well,
people are saying to you on the doorstep, we need to change A-levels.
If you come to a constituency like mine, where the majority of people have not gone to university, many people have got technical and vocational qualifications. They want to think that those have the same esteem as A-levels. They don't believe in the constant drive for people to go to university as the only route for success in life. And if we can bring them together into a globally respected qualification, I think that's a very positive thing. And these are examples, if I may, of why we are taking long-term, difficult decisions that tackle real problems and set the country up for future success.
It's just that you're not seeing it in the by-elections, for example.
Well, let's see. But it's a challenging time. What we will do is keep focusing on those issues.
Let me ask you about cutting taxes, because we know what your argument is against cutting taxes. There are a number of people, a number of voices in your party who are getting louder and louder, who are saying, look, the only way to win the election, whenever it is to cut those taxes, and you need to bite the bullet and do it. Are you listening to them?
Well, look, we all want to cut taxes. Everyone wants lower taxes. As a Conservative, it is one of the central tenets of conservatism that we believe in lower taxes. But
you may believe in it, but actions speak louder than the words, and we've got the highest tax burden for decades.
The first task has got to be bearing down on inflation, because it's ultimately inflation today and in the last couple of years since the pandemic, which has been the great evil, which has been eroding people's savings, leading to mortgages rising. If we can get that under control, and it seems like our plan is working, the Governor of the Bank of England said that we should be on course to halve inflation by the end of the year, then of course we'll consider what more we should do. But you can trust the Conservatives to make sensible, prudent decisions on the future of the economy and to bring down taxes when it's capable to do so.
Have you forgotten Liz Truss a year ago?
Well, look at the difference that we've seen in the last 12 months under Rishi Sunak. The fact that we have stabilised the economy, that it's growing, that inflation is falling, and critical issues like immigration, we're making significant progress for the first time in a long time.
Although legal migration was at a record high in the latest figures. But we must leave it there. Thank you very much, Robert Jenrick, the Immigration Minister. Let us know what you think of what you're hearing this morning. Here are the details. You can contact us by emailing kuenssberg@bbc.co.uk or on social media.
I'm sorry, I just had to pause. That was so fucking funny. Anybody remember Liz Truss before now?
Media using the hashtag BBC Laura K. We absolutely love to hear from you. And if you want to read the headlines as they unfold, just go to the BBC Live page. It's bbc.co.uk/news.
That was fucking brilliant. I'm not gonna lie, that was actually funny.
Well, we started this morning by asking how this conflict can be resolved. A lot of that depends on Israel's plan for what comes next. Former Prime Minister Naftali Bennett was leader of the Jewish Home Party and has described himself as more right-wing than the current Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu. And we can talk to him now. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
I wonder if you can tell us where you think Israel is right now with the imminent ground invasion.
Well, our objective is for the citizens of Israel to be able to return to their homes in the south and to have the hostages released. That's our goal. And we want to be able to live with security and peace. The families here in the town of Sderot and tens of thousands of other families to know that never again will they be under rockets, terror attacks, etc. from Gaza. The implication of that is that we need to demilitarize Gaza, and that's the stated goal of the government.
Okay. Well,
so we are planning a counteroffensive against this Hamas ISIS type organization.
So we saw 2 US hostages released, and I wonder, does a ground incursion into Gaza make it less likely you will get the rest of the hostages out?
Well, there's no option but to eradicate Hamas. And if anyone has a better idea how to eradicate this Hamas ISIS, let me know. But
do you? That's what I'm asking you is, does it make it harder to get the hostages out?
The hostages is one of the objectives. The other objective is to eradicate Hamas, so this sort of thing can never happen again. We thought that we can contain and live side by side with this Hamas state. That was a mistake across the board, and we're going to fix it.
Writing in the British press this morning, the UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak says Palestinian people in Gaza are suffering terribly at the moment. Our Foreign Secretary says that the 20 aid trucks that went in to Gaza from Egypt was a good start. Will more aid be allowed in?
Look, the world can come and help the Gazans. That's none of our business. Our business, the Israeli government is allowing that sort of aid in. But my approach is humanitarian for humanitarian. It has to be reciprocal. And we right now have hundreds of Israeli citizens, including 5-month-old babies held hostage. So if we're focused on humanitarian, it has to be reciprocal. And I would tie the two.
I mean,
if you want.
I understand that, but it is your business, isn't it? Because you have to clearly demonstrate that your fight is with Hamas and not with the Palestinian people.
So what is your question?
You said it wasn't your business, the humanitarian situation of Gazans.
No, we are not responsible for Gaza, just like you're not responsible for France. If others want to take care of the Gazans, that's theirs to do. They got a full-blown Palestinian Gazan state in 2005.
But
we handed over the entire. Hold on, we handed over the entire area. We pulled out our soldiers. We expelled the Jews living in Gaza and gave it to Mahmoud Abbas. And there was no siege or anything. The problem is that from days after that, they started shooting rockets at us.
But you do control the borders. You do control the borders. And so cutting off water, food, fuel affects all Gazans, not just Hamas.
Let me be clear now. We have an ISIS state next to us, okay? And, you know, this ISIS state, we are experienced in terror. Yes, we were surprised, but we will win. But the West is next. You know, if you think that it's not going to hit London, you're mistaken. It will. Radical Islam terror will hit everywhere. We saw ISIS kill a couple of fans in Brussels just a few days ago. you're next. So we're fighting a war that ultimately needs to and will defend the rest of the world from radical Islam.
I understand that.
Now,
I understand that.
We're focused, and here's what we're doing on the humanitarian side. We have told all the Gazans from northern Gaza to move to the south before we take action there, because our goal is for Gazan civilians not to die. We deliberately go out of our way to prevent that from happening as far as we can. The problem is that Hamas, ISIS, is using them as human shields.
Right.
Our big lesson is that we're going to defend ourselves.
Sure, I understand that, and I hear your words very, very clearly. You will know that the head of the UN and many others have said wars have rules. And forgive me if I quote some of the Geneva Convention to you. Article 43, basic rule. The parties to the conflict shall confine their operations to the destruction or weakening of the military resources of the adversary, and shall make a distinction between the civilian population and combatants, and between civilian objects and military objectives. So I come back.
That's exactly what we're doing. That's exactly why we are allowing the civilians to evacuate before pounding them. We're doing the opposite.
It's not exactly what you're doing.
No, wait, you asked the question. Would you let me answer?
Go ahead.
What Hamas, ISIS did is they entered roughly 30 communities. Whenever they can, they butchered babies. They burnt them alive. They pulled a baby out of pregnant moms and then beheaded the baby, beheaded the mom. They raped young girls. This is what we're dealing with. And with all due respect, I think the Geneva Conventions, first and foremost, tell a country, you need to defend yourself. And we will defend ourselves. We're going out of our way. I know that last week a hospital was fired by Islamic Jihad that fired a rocket on it, and BBC said that it was Israel, but it wasn't Israel. And I understand that BBC has taken a side of on the Gazan side, because all your questions are only about the Gazan civilians.
That's not true.
You haven't asked one question.
That's not true.
You haven't asked one question about those children. From the very beginning of this interview, you just are asking me about them.
Mr.
But
Bennett,
it seems
that
that
is
you
not
care
true.
little about our side. Oh, it is.
Mr. Bennett, I began by talking about the hostages. And what I'm asking you about now is...
No, I'm not talking about the hostages. I'm talking about the babies that were murdered. And you keep on caring only about one side, but that is the BBC way. But let me tell you something. We're here protecting you. We don't need your protection. And if you think there's a balance here between two equal sides, then you are lacking moral clarity. And BBC, I must say, is lacking moral clarity. What you guys did last week, shame on you.
Before we spoke to you, Mr. Bennett, I spoke to a veteran Palestinian politician, and I asked her about the massacre of Israeli citizens in southern Israel. I want to ask you now about the long-term strategy. Who runs Gaza? Let's say the Israeli military manages to wipe out Hamas. Who runs Gaza the day after?
Well, I assume they'll develop civilian leadership based on the localities and on the Gazans themselves, but it won't be Hamas.
Right. What about what Joe Biden said last week, which is, of course, Israel has the right to defend itself, but do not make the mistakes that the US, the UK made after 9/11? What do you think he means by that?
Well, I don't know. You'd need to ask him. What I know is that our big mistake is that for 20 years, we have again and again listened to the world. We've always contained this. We never went out to eradicate Hamas. That was the biggest mistake we made.
And that's the rest of the world's... Was that the rest of the world's fault then, rather than...
No, it's our fault. It's our fault. It's only Israel's fault. Though the world back then and now is basically telling us, cool down, let's go for a ceasefire. So our big mistake is that we listen to the world. I'm not blaming the world. The world has always been hypocritic about the Jewish state. I'm blaming us for listening to them, because at the end of the day, we have to protect ourselves. And, I assume you wouldn't want ISIS to live in your neighborhood, and you would demand that your government eradicate ISIS. That's what our people want to, and we're going to do that.
At some point, will Israeli politicians have to sit down with Palestinian politicians to talk about the long term?
Look, I'm fine with any talks always, but the truth is, unfortunately, that Hamas enjoys massive public Palestinian support. That's the sad truth that we sort of like to.
Well, we don't know
hide.
that. We actually don't know that.
We actually do.
The last
you know
elections.
Why? Let me give you.
The last elections were in
give you some
2006.
stats. Yeah, and you know that Hamas got a full majority, an overwhelming majority of the electorate.
It was a decade and a half ago.
I'm fine. Go and do elections. I can tell you that right.
Apologies. I do apologise. I'm not sure why the signal cut out at the end. Right, let's go back to our panel. Lucy Fisher. Jasmine, actually, let me start with you. First of all, what do you make of what Mr. Bennett has just been saying?
It's hard to know where to begin in terms of answering some of the things that Naftali Bennett was just saying. But let me start by actually saying I was incredibly struck by how he talked about Israeli aspirations. He said people want to return to their homes, people want to live in security, and people do not want to live under rockets. You could literally be talking about the Palestinian people right now. And I mentioned that because I think that what people seem to forget and what politicians seem to forget that I've been hearing for the last 2 weeks is this is an issue of humanity. This is not an issue of two different people whose lives are weighed differently. And Mr. Naftali Bennett just proved that by how he was talking about things. And just a really quick, because there was a lot of sort of mixing between different terrorist organizations here. And I want to make one thing very clear. When he says that he has a Hamas state next to him, if Gaza was a Hamas state, Hamas would control entry, they would control borders, they would control fuel, water, electricity. They control none of those things Israel does. So when he talks about Israel's responsibility towards Gaza, whether it's humanitarian or otherwise, if you can literally flick on a switch and decide whether a baby dies or not, there are 130 babies, by the way, now, preemies, premature babies, who are about to die. They are about to die because there is a lack of fuel. Their lives count just as much as precious Israeli babies who were killed. So we have to just equalize that. We have to be able to say these are two people whose lives matter in the same way, and to say that you are not responsible for that is quite disingenuous, and we have to push back on that.
I wonder, Simon, from what we've heard this morning, both from Naftali Bennett, from Dr. Hanan Ashwari, and also from Robert Jenrick, who was representing the government this morning, do you hear anything about a long-term strategy?
I mean, there's a lot has to be done right now. It's extremely difficult to fight your way into this territory. I really listened to this time, and I think more people should, to moderate Arab voices from the Arab world. There was a speech this week by Prince Turki bin Faisal, one of the sort of most respected Saudi statesmen, and he, who knows the Arab world better than many of the commentators here, who many of whom actually have been sympathetic to Hamas.
And literally, I can't cope. An entire fucking show on this fucking garbage? Really? Labour just won 2 by-elections with historical fucking implications, and you fucking retards are talking about shit that's on the news all day, every fucking day. Fucking pointless fucking shit, man. Really? Fuck off.
He really attacked Hamas for undermining the peace, the Saudi peace with Israel. Which the Saudis,
that's what they want.
Which the Saudis believe would have improved Palestinian rights and representation in the West Bank, and that was the idea. So one has to remember, Hamas's aim here was to destroy those relationships with the Arab world. It may well have succeeded, but we mustn't let it. But its aim was also to stop what has been Hamas's chief aim since it was founded in the early 90s, late 80s, which was to stop a two-state solution. And of course, I feel more strongly than ever that a two-state solution is the only way to go here. But it's going to take a few years after this tragedy. But I would say one thing to Jasmine, which is like, of course, Israel does control the borders of Gaza. But considering that, Hamas did manage to get a massive amount of military hardware into that state. And when one listens to Arab voices in the like Prince Turki bin Faisal, and also the brilliant female Arab interviewer at Al Arabiya, Nasha Nabil, who interviewed Khalid Mashal this week. I'm sure you saw it. You know, we should all listen to these interviews because she accused him of using, and this is, remember, this is an Arab, I think she's a Saudi interviewer, you will know. She accused him of using the Palestinian people as human shields. This is an Arab commentator, not an Israeli commentator. And she said that, you know, how many people are you going to kill? You're going to get killed by this kind of completely disgusting, barbaric operation. And his answer, which was very important, is he said, Russia lost 30 million people to defeat Germany. So that's sort of, that is Hamas's
he seemed to be suggesting that many Palestinian lives would be lost in this cause.
Hamas is a terrorist organisation that's deliberately using the Palestinian people.
Where do you think, Lucy, the diplomacy goes next? Because there is so much to do.
Well, there's so much to do. We've seen a flurry of that this week. Arab partners, Western leaders, Biden, Sunak flying into the region for talks. I was really struck that after the hospital explosion in Gaza on Tuesday, Jordan cancelled a summit with Egypt, with the Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas, with Joe Biden. And I think that just shows how diplomacy is really at the mercy of events. You know, we can see these sort of talks, derailed very easily. I was struck listening to both Robert Jenrick and Lisa Nandy today on the show, not willing to even give voice to some of the options for a long-term strategy of how Gaza is governed. I wasn't particularly convinced by Naftali Bennett's idea, well, some solution will come from Gaza itself. I think we need to hear from Israel a bit more detail in coming days about what they are planning. We've heard in the past 48 hours or so their suggestion that they will cut ties altogether. That could mean that they cut the electricity supplies that they gave heretofore before the most recent siege, as well as stopping any Gazans being allowed over the border to work. So it really does feel like the enclave is just going to be completely cut off from the entire world unless a solution is found.
What do you want to see happen next?
What I want to see happen next is to set up a pathway for negotiations, right? If we think about two things that have to happen for a successful negotiation to go through, you have to have at least some semblance of trust between the parties. And if you have no trust, then you need a trusted intermediary, trusted by both. And I was going to get to, I'll get to that in a second. The second thing you have to do is find a way for both of those parties to be able to save face in their respective environments, to come out of it saying, we got this, right? So those are the two things you need for a successful, potentially successful negotiation. So if we work backwards from there and we look at the way that Israel has conducted operations in Gaza over the last 2 weeks, and this is before a ground invasion, my question to them, and by the way, before anyone says anything, I believe every state has a right to defend itself. Israel is no exception. So let me get that out of the way. So there is defense and there is extreme offense. There is defense and there's 4,000 people dead in 2 weeks, over 1,800 of them children, right? So and the reason I'm bringing that up is because if you're creating that type of environment, what Arab leader is right now going to want to come in and stick their neck out for you and say, I will help you with these negotiations? Okay. What population is going to be governed if 4,000 people have died in 2 weeks? And by Prime Minister Netanyahu's admission, this could take weeks or even years. So these are the kinds of things we have to be thinking about now, strategically, rationally, so that we can come to a long-term solution.
We're actually nearly at the end of the programme. Who, in terms of a broker, who is that country? Who are you?
Traditionally, Egypt and Jordan have both played huge roles in the region, so those are two potential brokers.
I think the Saudis have to be involved in this now.
And the US on Israel.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much, all of you. We are out of time, but we really appreciate your insight and your contributions today. Thank you. For more, do join Paddy O'Connell and myself for the weekend newscast. We'll be recording straight after the programme and it'll be on BBC Sounds by lunchtime. That's it from all of us here this morning. Have a good day.
Most fucking enlightening fucking show I've seen in my fucking life. Wow. Like, don't care. Don't literally give a flying fuck about the Middle East. I honestly, what a fucking joke. It's 2023. These muppets on both sides. One thinks God gave them the land, the other thinks it's their fucking land because of fucking God as well. Like, no one's mentioned the word fucking God in this entire conversation. They're both mental. Just pointing up the fucking obvious so anyone with half a fucking clue. Doesn't matter who threw the first fucking stone. Why are they throwing stones is the fucking problem, you fucking morons. The answer is God. Get that out the fucking... Can we just... Hello? God is the problem here. You fucking morons. We're gonna kill Hamas. You're not gonna stop them being fucking brain dead about God, you fucking idiot. Good luck with that shit. Just fucking nuke the Middle East. It's full of fucking cave dwelling fucking wannabe fucking wizards anyway. Fuck them all. If you believe in God, you should get eradicated anyway. You waste of fucking carbon is what you fucking are. Oh God, fucking shut up. You don't even know what God is. You just use it as a fucking description for your own little fantasy and your little fucking in your little pea brain. Shut up. Fucking retarded. Like, I just watched an entire show dedicated to the most pointless fucking question ever known to mankind. Is my God better than your God? Go fuck yourself. It's like a Monty Python sketch. If you want to kiss fucking Israel's ass, be my guest. You want to kiss Palestinian ass, be my guest. The problem here is they both believe in God. That problem ain't ever getting solved. End of story. So as much as you want to talk about it, doesn't mean shit, bro. You both believe in wacky ideas. Well, one in particular fucking wacky idea. God. They're just 2-bit fucking wizards. They belong in Harry Potter. That's where they belong. They're like fucking muggles or some shit. I don't fucking know. Where are the fucking spellcasters? These twats live in caves. Pathetic. I was expecting a lovely show where the Tories get absolutely rinsed. No. Afterwards, the same shit that's on the news 24/7. Why do you think I don't even stream in the week? Because I have to listen to this fucking garbage 24/7 and you wonder why people get mad? Because they're brainwashed. They don't even want to fucking answer a fucking question. Do you believe in God? Well, yeah. There's your fucking problem then, you fucking moron. Fuck this fucking shit, man. And fuck anybody who fucking parrots the same shit that these fucking retards do. Answer the fucking question. What's your question? Is God a fucking issue? Yeah, let's see them fucking answer that shit. Bet he won't. Fucking tramps. Fucking shite. Here's me. Fucking lovely. Woke up all like chill. Nice cup of coffee. Want to destroy Tories. No. Fucking Israel Palestine bullshit 24/7. Fuck off. If you don't see me stream, you know why. I'm sick of this fucking shit on my show. Like, I'm tired. It's the most boring topic known to mankind. And these fucking brain dead fucking retards just circle jerk each other, just talking fucking nonsense. The real fucking answer is literally in a fucking book that these fucking retards read. There's your fucking problem, you cunts. Fuck off.